lowering friction really isn't about forcing productivity. It's about designing a life where starting feels less like a battle. I would argue that sometimes we think we're out of motivation, but really what we're surrounded by is what I call friction in our lives that's preventing us from doing what we really want to do.
Sure.
And to that end, friction is really anything. It can be physical, it can be emotional, structural, or psychological. But friction is really anything that makes the next step a lot harder than it has to be.
Yeah.
So for example, no, I'm really not picking on you when I say this, but the cluttered desk, for example.
Oh, we were just talking about that. Yeah, we need to move the studio.
Yeah, the cluttered desk, for example, it creates friction to getting tasks done.
Oh yeah.
Or on a simpler level, a login screen that you forgot the password to. If you get to that login screen for an app or a program that you have to use, that friction, if you don't know the password, sometimes it's just it feels easier just to like, well, I'm just not going to log in then. I'm going to go do something else.
Yeah.
Right. We've kind of experienced that with our HR software to an extent. The login screen, just as an example, created a lot of undue friction. I think what we saw with some team members, like, well, it's just too hard to do. I'm just not going to do it. I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to do this, so I'm not going to do it. And so that's friction is kind of makes the process of accessing something in that respect more difficult than it has to be.
And when you look at it, it's like it's really a little thing, but at the moment when you need something and you need it done now, then you have to figure out you have to take that left turn. You didn't want to.
Right.
It just compounds it.
Yeah. Or another example is that if you're trying to implement a habit, but that habit is buried under too many micro steps to accomplish it, there's going to be built-in friction to working towards that goal.
I find that I do that too much. I have steps for steps for steps for steps for steps.
Yeah.
Because I want to make sure that I get things done correctly, but I'm spending so much time setting up.
Well, planning. We get stuck in the
it gets
planning
unnecessarily
process.
Complicated.
Yeah, we get stuck in the planning process. And then when we add all these little steps and check marks along the way, or checklists along the way, it creates built-in friction. We get numb to it because there's so much in front of us that we just don't do it.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So
I think that's kind of where it happens with me. Is I have too many things on my checklist to do, like for onboarding new employees.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
My checklist is probably 30, 40 things long.
Yep.
Are they all important things? Yeah. But I mean,
they're probably all necessary.
Got to be a way to consolidate that a little bit.
Yeah. So the whole point is that the difference between being stuck and moving forward is often just a few unnecessary steps that we've put as roadblocks in our way. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about today.
Okay.
So the first thing I want to establish is, what is friction? Friction is just a term we use that we apply to anything that introduces extra effort between you and the desired behavior. So humans, as we talked about, humans always follow the path of least resistance. That's just our tendency. I'm not saying that humans are lazy, and what I would say is that humans are very efficient.
Right.
And so if there's a task that we can do that has less friction or less resistance, we're going to, by default, our tendency is going to be to move towards that rather than towards the thing or the behavior that has more resistance built in. So we follow the path of least resistance, not the path of highest intention. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So we may have high intentions, but when it comes down to it, if those high intentions have too much friction in the way, it's going to be more difficult for us to follow through and complete it.
Right.
Now, there's three types of friction. Just real quick, there's environmental friction. So that's just things in our spaces. So objects, the way our workspaces are laid out, and then or clutter or lack thereof. There's also cognitive friction, which is confusion, multi-step tasks that are too multi-step, or unclear next steps in our goals. And then there's emotional friction. That's related to uncertainty about what we're doing, threats to our identity. So if I do something that goes against my identity of who I've accepted myself to be as a person, or low confidence is another example of emotional friction. So those are three kinds: emotional friction, cognitive friction, and then environmental friction.
Sure.
And if something requires, for example, 5 decisions before you even start it, your brain is going to choose anything else other than that. And so the whole idea to increase motivation is to decrease the friction associated with what we want to do.
So it's kind of like a little bit like kind of relooking at the atomic habits thing a little bit, like stacking habits. That was atomic habits, like stacking habits.
Yeah,
that can, I would imagine, if you get too much into that, that can be that could apply here. Like there's just too many micro things to start habits.
So James Clear has become very successful talking about, you're right, stacking. He talks about stacking micro decisions one on top of each other. And his premise is that if you keep stacking those micro decisions or those micro tasks or those micro behaviors on top of each other, eventually you'll build something amazing and implement the habit that you want to implement. You can go too much to the extreme. There's some of us out there that are big planners, and so, oh my gosh, I need to implement all these micro habits. So I'm going to create a big long checklist of everything I have to do in the day to get out the door, to get to the gym. I've got to set up my workout clothes. I got to set up my drink ahead of time. I got to mix my protein shake. I got to eat my carbs. I got to, all these things. And when you see that in front of you, all that stuff, that's just going to build in friction.
Yeah.
Which is going to make it easier for you to not follow through on what you want to do.
And in reality, all you really need to do is throw on your clothes
and walk out the door.
Maybe grab a banana.
Correct. Yep.
Because I can't work on an empty stomach. I don't know how people do that, but
right.
I know a lot of people do. I can't do it.
So again, keep in mind as we're walking through this, the types of friction are environmental friction, cognitive friction, and emotional friction, and we're going to encounter those based on the setting or based on what we're doing. Mm-hmm. Getting work done at your desk, there's going to be perhaps a lot of environmental friction that you may have to deal with.
Yeah.
Whereas improving your relationship, there's going to be a lot more emotional friction most likely present with that. So it just depends on context.
Sure.
But why does it matter, right? The question I always ask myself is, well, who cares? Why are we introducing this? And that's where it gets really important. What's important to remember is that friction amplifies activation energy. Okay. Mm-hmm. It takes energy for our brains to decide to do something. There's a lot more energy that our brains have to expend to initiate an activity a lot of times than actually just maintaining it. And so there's a psychological cost to starting. And so the whole idea behind reducing friction is to reduce that psychological cost of starting something. Mm-hmm. Too much friction will create delay, avoidance, emotional relief, and reinforce procrastination. So friction actually serves a purpose as far as contributing to avoidance, but that avoidance causes emotional relief, I should say, from the tension of making a decision. If that makes sense.
Sure. Yeah.
So what do I mean by that? What are some examples of friction in a real world setting? We touched briefly on workspace clutter. There was a person I worked with who will remain unnamed. This was over a decade ago.
Oh, so it wasn't me?
It wasn't you.
Okay, you're not going to be razzing on me? Okay,
but
good.
She was notorious for having a cluttered workspace. She had the most unorganized, disastrous office I think I've ever seen.
Compared to mine?
Your office looks very neat compared to hers.
I'll take that as a compliment.
Yeah, take it as a compliment, trust me. But she chronically missed deadlines. She was chronically misplacing things. That workspace clutter created tons of friction in her life and in her work. And while she was very good at what she did, she had a hard time keeping on top of everything because of that physical workspace clutter. It created friction.
Yeah.
Another example is a morning routine with too many decisions. Sometimes we hear that if you want to improve your life or improve your mental well-being, have a good morning routine that you stick to. Well, a bad morning routine is one that has way too many decisions. And so an excessive morning routine with too many steps can also create friction, even though those steps are good or healthy. Other examples include those hard-to-access apps that are out there, or habits that are requiring multiple preparation steps.
So you do too little and you get yourself in trouble, or you do too much and you get yourself in trouble. So what the heck, man? It's like, it seems like there's like a no win.
Well, I think really what we're talking about is two opposite ends of the extreme, right? And where we want to get to is somewhere in the middle. As humans, I think it's very easy for us to overanalyze things. So if our lives are disorganized and a mess, we're going to latch on to information that tells us we need to plan more and be more organized. And so some people may go to the far end of the extreme. And so really what we're talking about is finding somewhere in the middle that makes more sense, and that is that gives us the freedom to do what we want to be able to do. Mm-hmm. So a good way to think of friction is that friction is like sand in the gears. One grain at a time, it stalls the machine over time.
Yeah. Good point.
So so to your point about, there seems to be, you can't win. Like we've said before that you need to plan, but now you're saying not plan too much.
I know.
I want to talk about something called the friction index. The idea of the friction index is to evaluate any task from 1 to 10 based on several things. First, evaluate any task based on the steps that are involved to complete it, the decisions required to complete the task, the emotional load related to the task itself, how accessible it is, and then also the environmental setup. Okay, what do I mean by that? So let's just talk about one example of going to the gym. Okay.
Yeah.
Going to the gym is a very high friction task. There's a lot that can get in your way. Take this morning, for example. It's
literally anything.
Literally anything could get in the way of that, right? That's a really high friction task. So it's important to be aware of that. And the goal with a high friction task is to reduce the amount of friction to make it easier to participate in the task itself. Now, compare the high friction task, and again, rated from 1 to 10. So if you're rated on 1 to 10, with 10 being the most friction, 1 being the most minimal friction, where would you rate going to the gym?
For me, it'd probably be like an 8.
Yeah, 7 or 8 is probably where it's at.
Yep. As soon as I have a gym in my basement.
Well, there's any number of things. Right. There's any number of things that can get in the way. Going to the gym in the morning, it's so early, I need my sleep. It's too cold. I don't like getting out of bed that early. That's one end of the spectrum for that. The other end of the spectrum is you could go in the afternoon. Well, I don't like going in the afternoon because it's always so busy. I can't get to the machines I want. Yeah. So there's always friction there, like you said.
There's always an excuse.
Yeah. On the flip side, let's look at a different activity that has next to zero friction: scrolling your phone. How would you rate scrolling your phone on the
-10?
Spectrum? Yeah, -10.
-10.
So for the sake of conversation, we'll say 1.
Yeah.
On that scale, it's 1.
It's hard to not do it.
Yeah. Well, because those phones are designed to have minimal friction to use them.
Yeah.
You pick up the phone now and you don't even have to tap in a password to access it.
Just look at it.
You just look at it. It scans. It brings you right in. You pull up Facebook or Instagram, and those logarithms just feed you exactly what you want. You don't even have to search for it anymore.
No.
And if you do have to search for it, now they've got AI integrated with them. So all you got to do is press a button and tell it what you want to see, and it'll bring it right up for you.
Man, when you put it that way, how lazy? Is that laziness or what is that?
To our point, though, it's not lazy. It's just efficient, right?
Yeah.
And so our brain is going to shift from. So if you're faced with scrolling your phone or opening up a Word document to start working on a proposal that you were going to be working on, you can see the problem, right? It's very easy. It's very easy to pick up the phone and just start scrolling. And suddenly we've killed too much time.
Little side note, I found that when I do that, it actually increases my anxiety and my stress, even though I'm doing something that I would rather do, like scrolling.
Because you're pushing off what you should be doing.
Oh my gosh, it's horrible.
You know that sometime in the not so distant future, it's going to come back around, and you're going to have to deal with it, reckon with it, to a greater degree. Yep.
But at the same time, it seems like my brain is craving doing something productive too.
Yeah.
I found that kind of interesting.
And so that friction index, again, you rate those tasks rate any task from 1 to 10 based on that. And what we find is that our life often isn't designed around our goals. It's more designed around the friction that we have. And a lot of times what we see is that we design our lives to avoid the friction rather than to lean into it.
Oh, okay.
Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with avoiding friction, but the key is
that's just natural.
It's natural to want to avoid friction. And so what's the best strategy to improve things? Well, it's to reduce your friction. So it's not to say we must dive into it and just tolerate it.
That's what I was just going to say. Let's just dive into it.
No, don't dive into it and tolerate it. It's just figure out ways to reduce it, to make the decision, the psychological weight of making a decision to engage in something that you have intentions of doing is you want to decrease the friction related to that. So then the question is, well, how do you reduce the friction? So let's kind of talk about the going to the gym a lot, and since I brought it up, that's a high friction activity.
Yeah.
Or let's actually talk about a work related thing. So what's a work task that you don't like to do, John?
I don't like tackling the onboarding checklist that we have for new hires, and as well as offboarding checklist too. I mean, it's a lot of busy work. I mean, it's important stuff, but it's busy.
Yeah.
I don't like doing them.
Yep. So to reduce friction for that particular task, the first thing you need to do is remove steps, meaning simplify the path to arrive at that behavior.
Sure.
So for example, I'm fairly certain, because I helped create it, that onboarding spreadsheet is buried somewhere in Google Workspace that's not easily accessible, right? So one simple way to simplify the path to that behavior that you want to achieve of onboarding someone effectively is to simplify the path to it. So rather than having it buried and having to wait on somebody else to send it to you, have it as a shortcut somewhere in Drive, right?
And I did do that. I have a shortcut in Drive, and I also have it on my bookmark bar too.
Right.
Yep. I got all important spreadsheets up there.
Simplify the path to the behavior.
Yep. That has made a difference.
Yep. The next thing you want to do, and this sounds ridiculously simple, but pre-decide what you're going to do. So what I mean by that is, rather than waiting for the moment of reckoning to make a decision, make the decision ahead of time. Once we decide to decide, that automatically reduces the amount of cognitive friction that we have. Whereas if
is that kind of like planning your day out the day before?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. So it's very efficient to reduce cognitive friction with what I call rules and anchors. For example, on Tuesdays I process my onboarding paperwork. Tuesday morning at 9 o'clock I process my onboarding paperwork. Now that may be oversimplifying it to a degree, but it's a rule that's an example of a rule. And at Tuesdays at 9 o'clock, this is what I do, and the decision's already made. The other strategy to pre-decide or to reduce friction is to have anchors set in place. Do you know what I mean by anchors?
Why don't you remind me? We talked about before.
So an anchor is things are set up in your environment so that way when you see something, it activates a behavior.
Oh, okay.
Right.
That's not what I was thinking of.
For example, you're not thinking today, right now you're not thinking, well, you will after I tell you this, but you're not actively thinking that tonight before you go to bed, you need to brush your teeth, right?
I am now, yeah.
Right, but you are now.
Yeah.
But during the day, you don't give it a second thought. Well, how do we accomplish brushing our teeth every night? Well, how do most of us accomplish brushing? I know there's some people out there that don't.
It just kind of happens.
It just kind of happens, right?
Yeah.
And the reason is you have that behavior anchored into something. You have it anchored to, perhaps it's when you walk into the bathroom at night, you see your toothbrush there, and that triggers a behavior. That's an anchoring point.
Yeah.
So that's an example. Another example is when parents put their kids to bed. We focus on a bedtime routine for our kids most of the time. And the reason that works is because those behaviors are an anchoring point for now it's time for bed. And it helps our kids, at least our young kids, decide that now is a time for me to go to sleep. So it's those anchoring points that can help reduce the friction. Because if we were to tell our kids out of the blue, well, crawl into bed and go to sleep, I can promise you're going to have a problem. But if you set up those anchoring points to, we're going to get your pajamas on, now we're going to read a story, now we're going to brush your teeth, and all those things, it leads them into the desired behavior.
Sure, okay. That makes sense.
An anchoring point. Another way to reduce friction is to prep your environment. So again, objects in sight lead to behaviors in reach.
So keep your phone off of your desk.
That is a very good point. That's actually the flip side of it. If you don't want to be scrolling on your phone, keep it off your desk. and put it in a drawer, for example. Or if you want to drink more water, have your water glass sitting on the counter.
Yeah.
So you don't need to think to go grab it.
Right.
Objects in sight lead to behaviors that are within reach. And to your point about the phone, reducing friction is done by making undesired behaviors harder to accomplish.
Yeah.
So to your point, put the phone in a drawer or put it in another room or something to that effect.
Right.
There was one time when Erica, our office manager, and my assistant, I had to get some reports done, and she actually asked to take my phone. And so she did. She eliminated undesirable behaviors. We kind of joke about it, but it's a strategy, right?
She your work mom?
No. She was trying to be helpful.
No, I know.
To answer phone calls and whatnot.
I know.
I
get it though.
Yeah.
I get it. I mean, that's why I've noticed I work better when I'm working remotely at home, even though my home office is very cluttered. It's a different environment.
Sometimes a different environment does help.
Yeah.
Then the one last idea to reduce friction is to turn effort into identity. What do I mean by that? Another way to say this is to use I statements. So who do you want to be as a person? For example, I'm someone who sets things up the night before. So turn that effort of prepping for your day the night before, make it as part of your identity. And when we talk to ourselves in that manner, it kind of changes it does change our perspective. There's a big difference in saying, I'm someone who sets up things the night before. There's a big difference between the person that says that and the person that says, I'm overwhelmed. It's Sunday night. I don't know what's going on tomorrow. I'm just going to go to bed, right? There's a big difference there.
Right. Tomorrow's still going to come. Might as well make it a little bit easier on yourself.
Yep.
Do those type of I statements, do they work better if you say them out loud as opposed to just like thinking about them? I was kind of wondering about that.
Yeah, the challenge is that a lot of people feel a lot of people feel uncomfortable talking to themselves out loud because it's just, for whatever reason, we've decided that it's unusual. But I would argue that it saying it out loud makes it much more effective.
Well, your subconscious mind hears it,
right?
You know, and that's from all the stuff that I've read, that's like the most important part to learning or to changing your behaviors.
There's something about putting it out into the world, regardless of whether or not somebody hears it, that's very reinforcing.
It makes it more real.
It does make it more real.
Yeah.
Because in our brains, as we all know, there's constantly thoughts running through our brains, and our brains are we're constantly having a conversation with ourselves in our heads to a degree, right? Our thoughts are constantly bouncing back and forth. And so it's very easy if you just think to yourself, I'm someone who sets things up the night before, it's very easy for your brain to say, no, you're not.
Yeah.
And so putting it out there in the real world kind of makes it more real.
Gosh darn brain trying to cut corners.
But the thing to remember when reducing friction is that every habit is a negotiation between friction and convenience.
Yeah.
And so really what we're talking about is, we're negotiating, how do we balance not having too much friction in our lives without going too far in the direction of everything has to be convenient. And so every habit is a negotiation between those two things.
There's something rewarding about doing something the hard way intentionally. I don't know if that makes sense. Like if there's an easy way to like a more automatic way to do something. Like let's just say writing an article from scratch, or as opposed to having AI generate it for you, and then you look at it and say, "Yep, that looks good." I mean, obviously, you know intrinsically that you did nothing for that,
right?
So there's got to be a lot. There's got to be a lot to say about doing some things the hard way,
right? For sure.
For the rewarding aspect of like I accomplished something,
right? And I'm all for making things more efficient, but at the same time, to be willing to do hard things, you have to practice doing hard things.
Yeah.
Let's look at the idea. Let's look at reading, for example. Sometimes people say there's those of us that love to read, and there's those of us that don't like to read at all. And often the difference between those two people is the person that loves to read has more practice with it. And so the person that doesn't like to read, it's not that they're illiterate. Maybe sometimes that's the case. But for the most part, we live in a very literate society, but people that don't like to read just haven't exercised that muscle. And so in order to start to love reading,
you have to start
reading.
Yeah.
And you have to make it a habit and a practice. And over time, reading gets easier and then goes from being hard to being pleasant. And so that's the same thing for any behavior. You have to practice hard behaviors to get comfortable practicing hard behaviors.
Yeah.
And so to your end, sometimes you just have to do it.
Up.
Well, just do it.
Just suck up and do it.
Decide to do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. This idea of reducing friction is never going to make things 100% easy. It's just going to make it slightly less hard.
Yeah.
To engage in your intended behaviors.
Right. Good point.
In the last segment here, what I want to talk about is I really want to focus on the fact that friction isn't just physical. I think that's really important. I would argue it's very easy to clean up a cluttered desk. It's very easy to modify your environment to be optimized. But a lot of times there's non-physical friction that's present that we have to deal with in some way. Sometimes friction is emotional, like I said before. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of times shame, fear, uncertainty. Sometimes those internal experiences are often we disguise them as logistics. What do I mean by that? Like the shame or the fear of failure related to completing a project or working on a presentation that you're going to give. The fear or uncertainty associated with that can often be disguised as, well, my office is so cluttered, I just can't do it right now.
Yeah.
And so it's really important to identify where your friction is coming from.
Yeah.
So to kind of help with that, you can ask, is it really actually hard, or does it just feel risky? And as we've talked about, we are risk averse. Mm-hmm. People are opposed to risk, and rightfully so, right? Our brains are designed to keep us safe and to provide stability and predictability, and risk by default is unpredictable and unsafe. And so we need to ask ourselves, is what we're doing actually hard to do, or is it just risky? It's important to kind of weigh those out. It's also important to go ahead.
Is it ever just like something where like I just don't, so like let's just say I have an atrocious office. It's messy, but it's not atrocious. True. But it's not risky for me to clean it up, but it's something I don't want to do.
So what I'm saying, so you're correct. What I'm saying is, if you're using your cluttered office as an excuse to not engage in an intended activity that you want to do, like writing a proposal or preparing a presentation, you need to ask yourself, is it really my environment that has the friction, meaning the cluttered office?
Yeah.
Or is a part of that friction also that I'm fearing that I'm not good enough to write this proposal, or I'm uncertain about how it will be received? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay, that makes more sense.
So what I'm just saying is, I don't want to over exaggerate the role of our physical environment or physical friction and minimize the impact of emotional or psychological friction.
I see.
Both of those share the same weight to a degree.
Okay.
So lowering friction really isn't about forcing productivity. It's about designing a life where starting feels less like a battle. So again, to remind you, the whole idea of reducing friction and the friction index is to not make the work easier, but it's to make starting the hard work less of a battle.
Sure. Yep.
Right?
Okay.
All right. So to kind of close this up, I want to challenge you and some listeners this week to pick one behavior that you want more of this week, and it can be anything. I want to drink more water. I want to get up earlier. I want to, whatever it may be. I want to write 2 pages of my dissertation, or I want to write 2 pages of my term paper. And so pick one behavior that you want more of this week, and then identify one point of friction that's associated with that behavior. And then I don't want you to eliminate the friction, but just reduce it by 20%. So if you remember, we talked about the friction index. Rate the behavior on a scale of 1 to 10. And then seek to reduce that friction by 20% and notice what changes as far as your ability to make a decision about it.
Sure.
So to close it up, you don't overcome resistance by pushing harder. you outsmart it by designing around it.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah.
I was supposed to challenge you on some of this stuff. Our producer Jessica said, John, you need to be kind of more like the devil's advocate here. I couldn't really find anything to push back on.
Well, you kind of push back me a little bit,
but it all makes a lot of sense, and it's you put out very clearly.
Well, next week will be maybe more of a hot topic one. We're going to talk about micro resilience. So today we talked a lot about the friction index, which is really what's the friction to starting something.
Mm-hmm.
Next week we're going to talk more about what stops us from continuing in our intended behaviors over time. And so we're going to talk about, I call it micro resilience, and we're going to talk about how to rebuild momentum when life drains your energy.
I think that's something that literally everybody can benefit from. So make sure we all tune in for that one.